Welcome to another Murder Talk Radio. I am Parker Evans.
I'm Victoria Evans.
And today we are talking about cultural Marxism not being a myth.
Or a conspiracy theory.
Yes, or a conspiracy theory. Basically, after our coverage of Steve Albini, we get a lot of really, I would describe them as bizarre criticisms. A lot of them focused on the fact that we had a problem with him being some sort of light communist. He wasn't explicitly a communist, but he was certainly commie adjacent, I believe is how I described him last time.
Yeah.
And we got a lot of really weird criticisms about that. A lot of them centered on the idea that we don't know what socialism or Marxism is. And I had a quick comment on that, which is that in a long, long time ago, in a past life, I was admin of the largest radical anarchist forum on the internet at the time. So if your criticism is that I don't understand radical politics, you should find a better criticism.
I think that he's a legend.
I disagree.
I know you do. But there's a lot more to that story.
It's not a good look. You can't be out there being like, I'm a legend!
Yeah, it's not a good look. And I know that you genuinely don't actually think of yourself that way, but I think that just your involvement in all of those scenes and those forums, and I don't even know if I should mention some of the cool stuff that you worked on that was really cool behind the scenes.
Probably shouldn't.
Very cool stuff that, maybe we should talk about in another episode.
My 4chan days. She's talking about my 4chan days.
Yeah, a lot of the comments that we got it was a lot of low blows. Absolutely. Essentially just making assumptions about us and attacking our education.
To defend a communist pedophile.
Yep. No matter what they say, until they're blue in the face, that is what they are doing.
But as a result of that, we thought we would do this episode on how cultural Marxism is neither a conspiracy theory nor a myth. And to start that, we're going to start with a woman named Abby Richards, who, at least until today, because I guess we'll get to that in a minute, but she worked and or works, we're not sure, for Media Matters, which is a leftist non-profit activist group. So according to her website, she graduated from Colorado College in 2018 with a bachelor's degree in environmental science, and in 2022 earned a master's degree in climate studies. And according to her biography that she wrote, she earned that master's degree researching, quote, the intersection between climate change and misinformation. She styles herself an expert on mis- and disinformation. It's literally what she says about herself in her Twitter bio. And I guess she is, in a manner of speaking.
She pretty much considers herself a misinformation educator and an environmental activist. And the way that she became well known on a wide scale was from around 2020 to 2021, she came up with this chart.
Yeah.
And this chart, it's called the conspiracy chart, but it looks like a food pyramid that's been turned upside down.
Yes, it is like an inverted food pyramid of so-called conspiracy theories, and most of them are genuine conspiracy theories, but a couple of them,
It says a lot about her. Okay, so it goes from what is grounded in reality to what's a conspiracy theory or what's detached from reality. And we'll get into that more very shortly. But it does say a lot about a person to see what they themselves put on the chart.
It does. So she was a senior video producer, or is a senior video producer for Media Matters. And what Media Matters claims that they do is that they monitor, analyze, and correct conservative misinformation in the U.S. media, or what they call conservative misinformation in the U.S. media. But they do that by running campaigns like Drop Fox. And I don't necessarily think that it constitutes correcting misinformation to tell people not to watch stuff.
No, I mean, I just think that's censorship. If you're trying to get rid of, and neither of us are conservative, but I do think that people who are, should be able to talk about it.
Absolutely. And Fox is, they're just another media group. I know that they were very unpopular amongst the left from like the Bush era onwards, but for myself, I don't really see them as being fundamentally different from MSNBC or CNN.
They're
really.
not. They're not. And a lot of people that work there, they all kind of move around and work at all of the same agencies. I'm not talking about the big talking heads. I'm just talking about
The actual journalists?
Yeah, the actual journalists. It's a job.
Didn't you have an internship with a Fox affiliate?
I did. When I was studying journalism here in Atlanta, I wanted a summer internship, and Fox is the only one that has one single intern, and I got accepted to that. I applied to a bunch of them at CNN. Like, the line out that door is long, very long. In fact, I couldn't get one here in Atlanta, and I also couldn't get one in New York. And I thought, you know what? Who's going to apply to Fox? And it taught me so much. Like, literally none of the people that I met there cared about the politics. It was a job.
So
none of them were actually really conservative.
Sorry, I thought you were done.
No, it's fine. It was a really good experience, to be honest.
So another thing that Media Matters has on their site, and this, if you click the link in the description, you can see the chart that Abby Richards made, and you can also see this video that I'm about to describe that is on the Media Matters website, produced by someone like Abby. For all I know, Abby made it herself. I don't know that, but she's worked at Media Matters as a video producer, so she may very well have made this. I don't know. But it's making fun of Mike Huckabee, who I don't know anything about, and some critique he had of socialism in the U.S. It's not very good satire, but it's an attempt at satire, and I don't particularly understand why a media nonprofit that is supposedly correcting misinformation is doing so by putting out satire. That seems, I don't know, it's more of like an ideological bent than correcting misinformation, which would be taking misinformation and, correcting it.
It just makes them seem a little, what's the word? Corrupt.
Ideological?
Yeah, ideologically corrupt.
Ideologically corrupt. That's good.
Huckabee, by the way, I come from a very conservative family, religious and conservative, and though I myself am not, I have a lot, exposure to it. Huckabee was a minister, and he was also a governor of Arkansas, and a, Republican, part of the Republican Party political figure. So just a little bit about him, a quick overview.
Fair enough. But so they basically are skewering the idea that socialism is present in the United States in any meaningful way. And under that video, I've included a bunch of graphics of socialism being present in the United States in a meaningful way. So I'm correcting the misinformation from the group that supposedly corrects misinformation, which was not my intent when I made this article, but ended up being part of it.
I think it's par for the course.
It is. It's so par for the course.
With groups like this, it really is.
So Abby also sits on the Environmental Media Association's activist board. She's on the Hollywood Climate Summit Advisory Board, the Nest Foundation Advisory Board, and she's a research fellow with something called the Accelerationism Research Consortium, which I found interesting because if you don't know what accelerationism is a sort of ideological theory that is supported on both the extreme right and the extreme left. And the idea is to push or accelerate the United States collapse. That's accelerationism. So she's on the Acceleration Research Consortium, ostensibly to study groups pushing accelerationism, as she works for a media analysis group that, instead of doing media analysis, is pushing satire, claiming that socialism doesn't exist in the United States, when there's actually more socialists in the United States now than there have been since the early 1900s, which is weird.
It is. And one thing that I've noticed that I find bizarre is just those widespread in these groups like anti-America. It's not about positive change. It's not about combating misinformation. It really just is about kind of destroying the information ecosystem and, like, honestly, kind of tearing apart the country. It's really unfortunate. And I know that might sound kind of like, intense or insane, but I can't see it any other way.
So Abby, in her chart, she's actually spreading misinformation and conspiracy theory in this chart that ostensibly is meant to graph out the severity of conspiracy theories.
Right.
She's got Iran-Contra, which is thoroughly documented to have actually happened, and which men went to prison over, at the same level of credibility as the statement Charles Manson is a CIA asset. Those things are not comparable to each other. Iran-Contra is real. She said, so she, on her chart, she put it in the category of "we have questions," diagonal from and closer to leaving reality than Epstein didn't kill himself, above UFOs, and adjacent to both Area 51 and Denver International Airport.
The day before this article was scheduled to be published, Abby's bio on X changed, and she retweeted this post from her former colleague about layoffs at the nonprofit.
Yeah, so this is from somebody named Kat Abu.
It's funny because when I lived in the UAE in high school, I had a pet cat named Abu. He was cute.
It says, bad news, I've been laid off from Media Matters, along with a dozen colleagues. She's referring to Elon Musk here. She says, there's a reason far-right billionaires attack Media Matters with armies of lawyers. They know how effective our work is, and it terrifies him.
What does that mean?
I don't know.
Clearly they're referring to Elon Musk.
She's definitely referring to Elon Musk. He's suing them. He's suing Media Matters.
Yeah. Him.
So Media Matters is being sued by Elon Musk because they're actually being sued not just by Elon Musk, but by the Missouri Attorney General, and they were sued by the Texas Attorney General too, although that's been quashed by a preliminary federal injunction barring the investigation on free speech grounds.
Yeah. There are allegations that they manipulated X / Twitter's algorithm in order to force ads to appear next to posts that they deemed controversial. And this was like in an effort to pressure advertisers.
Yeah, they were like, they found some like neo-Nazis or something, and then basically, allegedly, they just reloaded the page over and over and over again until they got ads next to the posts that they wanted the ads next to. And then they shared those as if this was like a regular occurrence that users were seeing all the time. And they tried to use that to pressure advertisers to leave the platform. So Elon Musk said he was launching what he called a thermonuclear lawsuit. And he also pushed for the attorney generals to investigate, and they started to. The Missouri AG, I believe, is still investigating, and the Texas AG, as far as I know, isn't, because there's now a federal injunction telling him not to.
Musk says that it definitely caused X to suffer financial losses.
But so Abby clarifies in a tweet, she may not work for Media Matters anymore. We're not sure because her bio changed, but she didn't explicitly say that she doesn't work there anymore. So we're just not sure.
Yeah, she just retweeted a tweet from a colleague. So does she still work there, but she took them out of her bio? Did she quit? Was she laid off? We don't know.
Anyway, this is all kind of an aside. Getting back to what she said about Iran-Contra, she clarified in a follow-up tweet that she wasn't saying that Iran-Contra didn't happen, but that the positioning is meant to imply questions about the involvement of Reagan in Iran-Contra, even though Reagan admitted publicly to funding Iran-Contra, and her tweet clarifying that she was implying that we have questions about Reagan's involvement was actually fact-checked by Community Notes correcting her, which I think is hysterical.
She's supposed to be an educator.
On misinformation.
Yeah, all misinformation.
And she's getting
supposed
corrected
to be
by Community Notes.
Some expert, some educator on mis and disinformation, and Community Notes popped up under her own post. That is just brilliant.
So another thing that she lists almost all the way at the top, above a line that she calls the anti-Semitic point of no return realm of conspiracy theory, is cultural Marxism. And she's not the only person to make claims of this nature. A lot of people have claimed that cultural Marxism is some kind of right-wing conspiracy theory or some kind of anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. And we're going to dig into that because cultural Marxism is literally just a component of every Marxist movement in every country where there has been Marxism ever.
Another nonprofit outlet that has dismissed cultural Marxism is Jacobin. Jacobin? What is it?
Jacobin? I don't know.
Jacobin? I know, right?
They're named, this is like super ironic, but without getting into the full thing, they're named after a guy who was involved in the reign of terror in the French Revolution.
Right. I hate the name of the magazine. I think it's...
They're an explicitly socialist magazine.
Yeah, they push Marxist viewpoints while, they pay...
Speaking of Community Notes, they made a post. This is in the article too. If you click the link in the description, you can see it. They tweeted out a story about Walmart being infamous for its, what they call, starvation wages. Mm-hmm. Amid staggering first quarter profits, is what they said. And they got community noted too. And then the community note on their post about Walmart says that Walmart non-corporate associates' average hourly wage is $17.50 an hour with full-time benefits, whereas the magazine pays writers 7 cents a word, so a Jacobin writer, and I'm just going to assume that it's pronounced Jacobin, I don't know. I just think it's funny.
It is.
It's a funny sounding word. But a writer writing for them would have to write 250 words an hour, not just on a full-time basis, but continuously 24 hours a day to make the same wage as a Walmart associate, and they still wouldn't get benefits like healthcare, paid time off, sick leave, or any kind of 401k.
The funniest.
And they also have record revenues right now because, as we mentioned earlier, there are more socialists in the United States now than there have been at any time since the early 1900s.
Their revenue is crazy.
When you have more socialists, you have more socialists subscribing to socialist magazines. So as of 2022, they're a nonprofit, and so their revenue is public information. And their revenues are over $4 million a year. And they're actually run by a guy named Bhaskar Sunkara. I'm assuming I'm pronouncing his name right, but I may very well not be.
I think it's correct.
Yeah, maybe. He's also president of The Nation magazine, which I did not know but found interesting.
He's also a publisher of Catalyst, a journal of theory and strategy, and London's Tribune.
Yeah. He's a former vice chair of the Democratic Socialists of America, and he wrote something called the Socialist Manifesto. And he's also been a columnist for The Guardian in the U.S.
Crazy eyes.
They have also claimed that Marxism in the U.S. does not exist, and I have shared from Marxist.com a screenshot, Who's Afraid of Karl Marx, where they say that what is not happening, you have nothing to be afraid of, even if it was happening, unless you're a bad person, because it's good that what's not happening is happening.
Really, there's just so many plot holes. It's very frustrating to be insulted by people like this.
It's just gaslighting.
It is.
It's
It's straight up
people.
gaslighting.
The Chancellor Kent Professor of Law and History at Yale University, a guy named Samuel Moyn, argued in a New York Times article that cultural Marxism is inseparable from the most noxious anti-Semitism. Moyn was a professor of history at Columbia and a professor of history and law at Harvard, and Moyn himself is also Jewish. And I thought that his false claims regarding cultural Marxism were darkly ironic in the aftermath of this performative activism that we've all seen by Marxists and anarcho-communists advocating on behalf of a would-be Islamist caliphate named Hamas in the name of peace, while also threatening Jews on college campuses across the United States, declaring from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, and committing blood libel in making false claims that Israel is committing some kind of genocide.
It's very ironic, and it also makes me think, how much do you hate yourself?
Now, there are anti-Semitic conspiracy theories that incorporate the idea of cultural Marxism, but that doesn't make cultural Marxism itself an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory, and it doesn't make it an also-ran of cultural Bolshevism or Jewish Bolshevism, which were anti-Semitic dog whistles from the World War II era Nazi movement that blamed Jews for communism and served as a kind of an ideological justification for the German invasion of the Soviet Union and for the Holocaust. Like, they're not the same thing.
They're not. It's a lot of conflating ideas and gaslighting.
Yeah, white supremacist conspiracy theories that blame Jews for cultural Marxism, Black Lives Matter, and other social justice movements don't really square up with the idea that Black Lives Matter believes that Israel is a white colonialist state, which the leadership of the Black Lives Matters movement has stated publicly, that they think Israel is a white colonialist state. And they think that because of the influence of both cultural Marxism and Islamist teachings on black activist groups.
There's a mass of inaccurate history. I don't know if people don't want to go back far enough or people just refuse to look at it.
Both.
But yeah, a mix of both for sure. But there's definitely an agenda here. Even if people don't believe that they themselves are pushing an agenda, the history that they are like purporting to be fact is just so like obviously inaccurate.
You know, the white supremacist conspiracy theories blaming Jews for cultural Marxism, Black Lives Matter, and the social justice thing also doesn't really square with the Black Lives Matter statement, because white supremacists don't think Jews are white.
No, and they don't.
I know that there are Middle Eastern Jews, but there are also white Jews.
Yep. And absolutely, white supremacists do not think that.
And those activists will tell you that anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism, even as they spread blood libel, while remaining curiously silent about ongoing genocides in Myanmar.
Which will always be Burma to us.
Yes, it will. And China and Ethiopia and South Sudan and Syria. For some reason,
when
the
Jews are
non-existent
involved.
genocide, the genocide that isn't a genocide, is the only genocide they seem to care about.
It's almost as if they're just anti-Semitic.
It is almost like that. Strange.
As we mentioned in an earlier article on Russian disinformation, it is believed that the anti-Semitic Protocols of the Elders of Zion was created by Russian intelligence in the early 1900s and has since been endorsed by many prominent Islamists, including Hamas, with other Palestinian leaderships, as well as the Russian-aligned Iranian government.
If you look in the article, we have several graphics supporting some of what we've said, including a tweet from Black Lives Matter saying that they stand in solidarity with Palestinians and are committed to ending settler colonialism in all forms, and that they will continue to advocate for Palestinian liberation, always have, always will. And then below that, they have a flag that says both Black Lives Matter and Free Palestine that they're holding up at some protest somewhere. I'm not actually sure where it's from.
Hey, at least they spelled Palestine correctly on the sign.
They did this time.
The whole thing is just incredibly ironic because it doesn't line up with the actual history of the region.
Yeah, you know, another thing that those activists won't tell you is that Palestine is a totally arbitrary cultural construct. It was made up of different fragments of Arab Islamists who used to be part of the Ottoman Empire Caliphate that collapsed in the early part of the 20th century after it was forcibly ejected from large swaths of Greater Europe, starting from the Middle Ages. The Ottoman Empire seized most of Greece, for instance, in the 1450s, and it took repeated attempts, culminating in an 8-year civil war, to successfully eject them from Greece, which they had controlled for nearly 400 years before the Greek War of Independence that ran from 1821 to September 1829. This is a little outside of the Marxism thing, although since the introduction of Marxism, several Islamist scholars and a lot of these Islamist groups have adopted Marxism. They see them as dovetailing quite nicely. There was a very famous Islamic scholar, I can't think of his name off the top of my head, but he visited Moscow in, I think, the 40s, and he tried to convert them, because after he went to Moscow, he was quite impressed by their ideology, and he saw it as in line with the Islamist ideology. And we have a little excerpt from a newspaper talking about how Palestine as a group is just a cultural construction. And it says, quote, and this is from a Syrian-sponsored Palestinian, the head of a Syrian-sponsored Palestinian unit, a guy named, man, I'm going to butcher this. Maybe you can help correct my pronunciation of this. Zuhur Mohsen? Is that?
All right, that's pretty close. Arabic is a phonetic language, so as you read it, that is essentially the way that you're pronouncing it. It's not like French or anything like that.
French is actually pretty phonetic too. So this guy's
I
quote,
don't know about that.
He says, there are no differences between Jordanians, Palestinians, Syrians, and Lebanese. We are all one people. It is for political reasons only that we carefully emphasize Palestinian identity. It is in the national interest of the Arabs to encourage the existence of Palestinians against Zionism. Yes, the existence of a separate Palestinian identity is there only for tactical reasons. End quote. I don't know how much more explicit you can get than that.
In the 1950s, Malcolm X said that Black Americans, quote, would be completely in sympathy with the Arab cause, unquote. And the FBI opened a file on him after he wrote a letter to President Truman from prison in which he declared that he was a communist.
Yeah, in the 1940s, Malcolm X had joined the Nation of Islam, which has often criticized Israel and promotes the idea that black people are the original people of the world, that white people are devils, and that the death of the white race is near at hand. After leaving the Nation of Islam due to internal political conflicts, Malcolm X was assassinated by then Nation of Islam member Thomas Hagen, also known as Mujahid Abdul Halim. The Black Panthers, developed in part after their founders were inspired by Malcolm X, developed a relationship with the Palestinian Liberation Organization, and Eldridge Cleaver from that group met personally with Yasser Arafat and gave a speech supporting the Palestinian cause.
In an online interview with Jared Ball of the Real News Network in 2015, Patrisse Cullors, one of the co-founders of BLM, described the leaders of the organization as, quote, trained Marxists, super versed on ideological theories, unquote, end quote. Shit. Cullors identifies as a, quote, black queer activist and as a prison, police, and militarization abolitionist, which she says is inspired by the, quote, legacy of black-led anti-colonial struggle in the United States and laments, quote, the historical pains and damage caused by European settler colonialism.
In the article, I included a little clip from the movie PCU. I've got a couple clips from PCU in the article, and I'm going to play that for you now because I feel that it is topical here. So here is an excerpt from the exceptional film PCU.
I'm a black man. There's no justice for me here in America. I should be at the front of the line.
Yeah, well, I'm gay and subject to ridicule and discrimination wherever I go. Women are oppressed throughout the world. Give it a rest.
Thank you very much.
So in a video that resurfaced from a panel at Harvard Law School, Cullors is quoted as saying, Palestine is our generation's South Africa. If we don't step up boldly and courageously to end the imperialist project called Israel, we're doomed. And in addition to what she called the legacy of black-led anti-colonial struggle, she also cites an activist and a formerly incarcerated Weather Underground member, Eric Mann, as her mentor during her early activist years. Now, Mann was elected to the National Committee of the Students for a Democratic Society in 1968. He was part of the 60s political counterculture. And he told the Associated Press at that time that he believed in what he called, quote, continuous resistance against institutions and policies of corporate capitalism. And he said that SDS chapters had to transition from being campus protest groups to being community groups that would guide students as what he called, quote, a de facto government. And here's a little excerpt from something that he wrote. He wrote this himself, and he says, another example of the effort to synthesize revolutionary black nationalism and Marxism was the League of Revolutionary Struggle, which operated from 1978 until 1990. It was the largest and, in my view, most effective of the groups that comprised the new communist movement. As Dawson explains, the new communist movement included groups that believed the United States needed a new communist party allied with the People's Republic of China. And that's the full excerpt.
Cullors studied for a degree in religion and philosophy at UCLA, where some of the worst violence has erupted in student protests surrounding the conflict in Gaza.
Yeah, we actually have video of this in the article. I won't play it here, but if you click on the link in the description, you will be able to see these videos. We've included them in the article, and you can go see some of this violence. It's pretty horrific for college campuses in the United States. In one instance at UCLA in late April, a Jewish student was beaten unconscious and taken to the hospital with a head injury. And in another incident at UCLA, a Jewish student was chased down, knocked to the ground, and held captive for about an hour in an area where protesters said Zionist Jews aren't allowed. And just for the record, I don't know that that kid was a Zionist at all. I think he was just walking through campus. He wasn't part of the anti-protest movement or anything as far as I know. He was just a kid trying to go to school, walking through campus.
I can't believe this stuff is happening.
It's absolutely crazy.
It is. It's horrifying. Earlier in April 2024, CNN published an article that said, quote, Columbia University is facing a full-blown crisis heading into Passover as a rabbi linked to the Ivy League school urged Jewish students to stay home. And tense confrontations on campus sparked condemnation from the White House and New York officials. Events like these, and a lack of any real meaningful response from the leadership of these universities or from police in dealing with them, led to pro-Israel demonstrators attacking the protest encampment at UCLA.
Yeah, to touch on a little media criticism here, the article that the New York Times published about this was titled, quote, How Counter-Protesters at UCLA Provoked Violence Unchecked for Hours. In the New York Times version of events, the clashes began after counter-protesters tried to dismantle the encampment's barricade. Pro-Palestinian protesters rushed to rebuild it, and violence ensued. The Times also said that violence ebbed and flowed for nearly 5 hours, mostly with little or no police intervention. They said the violence had been instigated by dozens of people who were seen in videos counter-protesting the encampment, attacking students in the pro-Palestinian encampment for several hours, including beating them with sticks, using chemical sprays, and launching fireworks as weapons. As of Friday, no arrests had been made in connection with the attack. And the New York Times didn't seem to do a lot of research in their backing this, because I've followed these stories pretty closely, and there was a lot of violence that happened, we just discussed, that led up to the counter-protesters assaulting the encampment. And I would agree with the New York Times that it was an assault on the encampment, but it was provoked by a lack of any kind of response amid, I mean, what are they supposed to do? Just allow Jews to continue to be targeted on campus? That doesn't seem like a good strategy to me.
A lot of videos have emerged from the conflict at UCLA that show this melee of violence, and it's very disturbing. It's very disturbing to see.
You know, contrary to the claims made by people like Moyne and Richards, who we mentioned earlier in this article, the movements supported by people like Colors and Mann are explicitly built on a foundation of cultural Marxism. The Cultural Revolution in Marxist China, for instance, saw violence and chaos of exactly the same kind erupt across Chinese society as Maoist Red Guards sought to destroy what they called the Four Olds. And this all started on college campuses in China at the time. And what they were opposed to was the Four Olds: old ideas, old culture, old customs, old habits. And they wanted to replace them with what they called the Four News: new customs in a new culture with new habits and new ideas. And they accomplished this. See if this sounds like anything that you may recall from the last 5 years. Destroying property, targeting people seen as representative of the olds, like landlords, wealthy peasants, intellectuals, journalists, and other dangerous types. Estimates of the death toll from this vary widely, but at the high end, they range towards 100 million people who were murdered by the new Marxist regime in China. Now, by contrast, the Reign of Terror that Jacobin named their magazine over killed 30,000 people. So, 30,000 killed for French democracy in something called the Reign of Terror, which was so bad that it essentially caused the French to reconsider what they were doing and institute new democratic rules to ensure that people would stop being guillotined, compared to 100 million in China. That's a big difference.
It really is. It sounds a lot like something else that's being compared.
Millions of Chinese people were violently persecuted during the Cultural Revolution in things that were called struggle sessions. These were violent public spectacles where people would be accused of being class enemies, and they would be publicly humiliated, accused of various crimes, and subjected to things like state-sanctioned imprisonment, torture, rape, beatings, harassment, other things like property confiscation. They'd be medically neglected, and they would have like their social standing and social identity erased.
This included the active participation and support of complicit journalists like Wang Shiwei, who joined the May 4th movement, which was a Chinese anti-imperialist political movement which grew out of student protests in Beijing that began on May 4th, 1919, and then later joined the Chinese Communist Party in 1926.
Yeah, after he decided he was going to be critical about aspects of the Chinese Communist Revolution, he wrote some criticisms of Mao. He was executed after Mao had him expelled from the CCP in 1947. So, warning to any journalists out there who think that supporting this stuff is a good idea, they'll come for you next.
It's just kind of how it goes. It's, as I like to say, par for the course. I feel like I've been saying that a lot lately.
Yeah, they don't want power for no reason. They want power to use that power. And when they say things like kill landlords, they mean it. And when they say things like kill journalists, they mean it. They don't mean journalists except you. They just mean journalists.
Yep. The terminology of Cultural Revolution, along with the oppressor dynamic for understanding the world, appears in communist discourse and literature well before the founding of the People's Republic of China and subsequent Chinese Cultural Revolution.
Yet the Cultural Revolution in China, which is cultural Marxism, has been compared to the Soviet Cultural Revolution, which was cultural Marxism, which was a similar radical restructuring of culture and society in Soviet Russia and the USSR that took place between 1928 and 1931, with the goal of forming a new culture to support a new socialist society. And they killed a whole crap load of people too. Another interesting thing, and this isn't in the article, it's just kind of an aside that I'm going to go into, but they also killed a lot of gay people. And what's interesting about that is that before they killed a lot of gay people, they made homosexuality legal for a while. And then they changed their minds when they needed a new enemy to confront. And homosexuality became the target. And they made it illegal again and started sending people to camps in Siberia and started killing people.
I really want to say that there are a lot of people in the LGBT movements in the West, in various countries, who support Hamas and
Queers for Palestine.
Yeah, exactly. And it's very disconcerting as someone who has lived in the Middle East, who lived in the Middle East for 12 years. Islam will never support homosexuality. They might accept that kind of support momentarily, but when push comes to shove, they are not on your side.
They'll throw you off a roof.
They absolutely will.
There's actually a Palestinian cleric who said that he wanted to throw gay people off the roof. He said that that's what Muhammad said that you should do with gay people. And he said if the fall didn't kill them, you should then stone them to death.
Yep.
China exported that same style of revolution all across Southeast Asia, just as Russia did in Eastern Europe, including Indonesia, Malaysia, Myanmar, or Burma, Vietnam, and Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, who were responsible for the Cambodian genocide that took the lives of nearly 3 million people. And leftist activists would have you believe that the United States military was responsible for the true horrors in Cambodia. But after the United States withdrew from Vietnam and Cambodia, there was no one left with the power to stand against the Khmer Rouge, and inspired by Mao's Marxist cultural revolution in communist China, Pol Pot tried to purify, his words, not mine, Cambodia, targeting different ethnic groups and people who were considered remnants of old society, which led to the murder of intellectuals, government officials. They even killed Buddhist monks in the name of progress. And they had a slogan, "What is rotten must be removed."
Benedict Kiernan, a historian who is the Whitney Griswold Professor Emeritus of History, Professor of International and Area Studies, and Director of the Genocide Studies program at Yale, has compared the Cambodian genocide to both the Armenian genocide, which was perpetrated by the Caliphate of the Ottoman Empire during World War I, as well as the Holocaust perpetrated by Nazi Germany during World War II.
Yeah, just a quick aside, but we mentioned Yasser Arafat earlier, who's the leader of the PLO. He's actually the nephew of the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, who met with Hitler during World War II basically about building camps in the Middle East. They wanted to build more concentration camps, and they thought they had a natural alliance with the Muslims. And they met. They never ended up doing it, but they met about building, a Middle Eastern Dachau.
Yeah, it's not actually on her conspiracy theory chart, but some people think that didn't happen, and there are actual historical photographs of Haj Ahmed al-Husseini, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, meeting with Hitler. And what's most hilarious about this to me is that Hitler refused to shake his hand. It's also not hilarious, but very telling and indicative of the kind of cover-up situation, is that Yasser Arafat changed his last name when the Nazis lost World War II because he didn't want to be associated with the failure of his uncle.
So racism was a major part of the ideology of all three of those regimes: the Cambodian regime, the Armenian genocide perpetrated by the Ottoman Empire, the Ottoman regime, and the Holocaust perpetrated by the Nazis. Racism was at the center of all of them. And they also targeted religious minorities and, quote, idealized ethnic peasantry as the true national class, the ethnic soil from which the new state grew. And that has parallels to the Cultural Revolution in Russia, which idealized the same peasantry that it brutalized, as it created a new ruling class in the Politburo, the Kremlin, and the KGB, GRU military intelligence apparatus that came to power. Because that's what happens when you unseat an existing group that has power. It creates a vacuum, and new power structures emerge. You do not, in fact, create a classless society. You just create new, more complicated forms of class.
Yep.
And a version of that same sort of cultural movement exists in the United States today, born from the fabric of countercultural radicalism that was popularized by students and the music and art scenes under a variety of left-leaning ideologies. And the parts of it that have seeped into mainstream American culture are known by quite a few different names. Some have claimed that it ruined college and comedy as political correctness or wokeness. Earlier, we played that clip from the film PCU. That's a 1994 movie starring Jeremy Piven and David Spade, which is based on experiences that the scriptwriter had while he was attending Wesleyan University, which is considered what they call a Little Ivy, and it's located in the somewhat downtrodden Middletown, Connecticut, where I used to work. I used to drive by Wesleyan literally every day. But it's all the same basic paradigm as cultural Marxism, which in the same way that it did in China, the same way that it did in Soviet Russia, uses a constructed hierarchy built on classes of personal identity as a kind of Trojan horse to build a coalition that can usurp existing power structures and help to establish a socialist state.
This style of student radicalism and the obsession with the perceived oppressed other developed gradually over the period between the end of the Civil War and the hippie movement. As various social justice movements merged in support of each other and spread throughout the youth counterculture, music, and art scenes, primarily by way of beatniks, many of whom were also central figures in the hippie movement, and later by way of Antifa in the punk scene.
The New York Times claims that there's no evidence that adversarial nations have engaged in material support of student protesters. And although it's true that there's no smoking gun in this regard, their article notes that Russia is known to have engaged in these exact same kinds of activities, even just within the last few years. And we talked about that in some previous articles, one or two of which are linked in the article that this podcast is based on, which you can read by clicking the link in the description. And it's also true that adversarial nations have given over $13 billion to American universities just since 2012. And most of this money was concentrated amongst the Ivy League schools where these protests have been most prolific. We have a chart in the article where you can see all the money that these countries have donated to different American universities. Qatar, which supports Hamas, gave the most at over $3 billion. And I know it's that old joke, a billion here, a billion there, and sooner or later you're talking about real money. That's a lot of money.
It is a lot of money. And that comes straight from the U.S. Department of Education.
Carnegie Mellon received the most. They got $1.5 billion. Cornell got over $1 billion. Harvard got almost $1 billion. MIT got almost $1 billion. That's according to a report in the New York Post. Their article also includes claims that over 200 of these colleges withheld donation information from the federal government, even though they're legally required to report it, which is weird and suspect.
Incredibly weird and incredibly suspect.
And this is the problem of the kind of expertism of Moyne and of Richards. It's part hubris, part inability or unwillingness to see beyond their own little silo of information and ego. And that's giving them the benefit of the doubt that they're actually acting in good faith when they speak on this topic, because something that both Islamists and Marxists are noted for, as we kind of mentioned earlier in this podcast, is gaslighting. They'll just outright deny that they're doing something that you've literally watched them do. It's crazy to experience, but you can very easily go see it by reading any of the statements that Islamists have made about the pogrom on October 7th in Israel. It's crazy, the things that they deny.
It is. Especially if you read the Hamas charter and then listen to things that Hamas supporters have to say.
Yeah, you know, Hamas is, a lot of people don't know this about Hamas, but Hamas is explicitly a Marxist group. So is the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization. Many Islamist groups are. In our article, we have a video, a very sad, very violent video, but you can see a 21-year-old Tanzanian student who was working as an agricultural intern before Hamas kidnapped him from his workplace in Israel on October 7th. He begs them for his life, and they shoot him dead in cold blood. They shoot him over and over again for the crime of being employed in Israel. And if you don't know where Tanzania is, it's an African country. This guy's not some kind of white colonialist settler. He's a black immigrant to Israel who's just trying to work and earn some money, probably to send home to his family in Tanzania. And they kidnap him and they shoot him dead in cold blood, just for the crime of working in Israel.
A lot of people think that Hamas is for the Palestinian people. They are not. They're not. If you actually care about the Palestinian people, you will not support what Hamas is doing, because they want to destroy Israel. And there are 2 million Arab, Muslim, Israeli citizens.
Most of them are Muslim.
Most are Muslim. And people don't like to talk about that. They don't even think about it.
No, they don't like to acknowledge it at all.
They absolutely don't. It's insane.
It undermines the idea that Israel is trying to commit some kind of genocide.
It
Although,
does.
frankly, so does if they're like, there's a genocide. They've killed 30,000 people. By the way, they just make up numbers.
They do. They change.
I've heard 30, 40, 50, 60. The official number as of the time of this podcast is hovering around 30 from reliable sources. But I've recently seen people claiming 40 and 50. But there are millions of Palestinians. If this is some kind of a genocide, it's the least efficient genocide in all of history.
It's another just example of straight up gaslighting to call it a genocide when the Holocaust is in our near, history.
Well, it's blood libel.
It is.
But when these socialist student groups go out and they say that they want to see a global intifada, this murder of Joshua Malal, the Tanzanian student working in Israel, this is what they mean. This is what they mean when they chant from the river to the sea. When they chant globalize the intifada, this is what they're telling you they want to globalize. And this is the end result of cultural Marxism, which casts the cause of Palestine as the oppressed other and Israel as some colonial tyrant guilty of the crime of whiteness. And a version of this is what they want to bring to America and the rest of the Western world. But we don't have to let them, and we don't have to let them gaslight us about it either. I want to give the movie PCU the last word. And before I do that, I'll say, when there's nothing meaningful left to transgress against, transgression itself is the only obvious target to transgress against. And so, with no further ado, we will say goodbye.
Thank you for listening.
And here is Jeremy Piven giving what may be the greatest speech ever put to film.
What's going on here is about America.
Shut up.
It's about democracy. It's about the Bill of Rights and basic cable, call waiting, and free trips to the salad bar. It's about everything that makes this country great. Our country. We can do something about this. We can finally say that when some people are having a good time and drinking some beers, throwing some meat, that we're not going to protest. In fact, I promised myself I wouldn't do this. I'm sorry. If we could just say that, if only to each other, just this one time, that we're not going to protest. That we're not going to protest.
We're not gonna protest! We're not gonna protest!
We're not going to protest.
We're not gonna protest.
We're not going to protest. We're not going to protest.
We're not gonna protest.
We're not going to protest.
Not gonna protest.
This is not good. This is really not good.
Protest.